Hey everyone, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I am your host G1. As always, I hope you're having a good week. Been a busy one for me, and for others. In case you are noticing, minimal posting over at the mothership, WesternRifleShooters.us. Concerned American, who curates the homepage, has been away for a little bit, traveling and having some spotty internet coverage, as you might imagine in some places. So posting is going to be light for the next couple of days. I just wanted to let everyone know that. I think it got posted over on Gab, but some people don't always see things, so let everyone know so people don't think that the worst has happened. So what are we talking about today? Well, from the title and thumbnail, you know we are going in on that dastardly traitor, Tucker Carlson. How dare Tucker give any kind of airtime to that fiendishly tyrant Vladimir Putin? Okay, maybe that is enough to throw off the YouTube algorithm. Yes, folks, the leftards and elitists are having an absolute apoplectic meltdown because Carlson has the audacity to travel to Russia and interview the leader of the traditionalist world. Our progressive communist elite can't have that kind of messaging get spread around, so they have launched into an all-out offensive to discredit and destroy Carlson. For the moment, let's deal with this at its surface level. You know, on this show, I always talk about things being far more than what the surface level is, with hidden motivations and hidden agendas, as well as hidden actors and string pullers and controllers. So I'm not glossing over any of that here. We'll get into that other level a little bit later on. For now, let's just go with the narrative. What is being put out there? Carlson goes to Russia. And I believe it was on Monday, he was spotted in Moscow at the airport, a train station, something like that, and then later on at a hotel. There was some videos and still photos that came out and were posted on social media. And he was asked if he was going to interview Putin, and he joked. He said, "We'll see." And that is indeed exactly what he did. Tuesday evening, he posted a short video explaining why he interviewed Putin, which in and of itself is ridiculous because a journalist should not have to explain to other journalists and the media why he's interviewing one of the most powerful people in the world. That's self-evident. It's because that's what journalists do. At least that's what real journalists do. It's supposed to be their jobs to talk with those in power. And yes, as much as we might hate journalists and disagree with them, it's their job to ask leadership tough, hard questions, to keep the leaders on point and to foster communication with people, place leaders in a position of having to explain their actions and explain their thought processes behind what they do. That is a good thing. That's a public service. It's what they're supposed to be doing. And it can be done in a non-adversarial way as well. It does not have to be the press versus leadership. It can be mutually respectful and still ask hard questions. You don't want yes men. You don't want people who, like our media, of course, what American media and press serves as is a mouthpiece for the communist and statist elite. They have no interest in actually conveying anything but the official propaganda of this regime and the official narrative. Anything that goes against that grain and threatens to educate people or sway them from that party line has to be ruthlessly ridiculed and crushed and suppressed. And Carlson has, of course, become the favorite target of the official state media, so it's no surprise that they launched into a critical assessment of him undertaking this interview. What is somewhat surprising is the level to which they have descended And what it clearly demonstrates to anyone who is paying attention, this is coming from both sides of the so-called aisle, and it just demonstrates clearly the uniparty in place. You're seeing this from other, conservative talking heads, conservative media saying, Carlson's a traitor. He's giving voice to Putin. Now, normies may think that the language that I used before is over the top or hyperbolic. However, what the talking class has called for should make it very clear that I'm being a little bit too conservative in my assessment. These people are calling for Tucker Carlson and his crew to be prevented from re-entering the United States. They've leveled charges of treason against him and called for him to be banned from showing the interview. And that all happened on Monday before it was even confirmed that he was in Russia to do an interview with Putin. Today we have members of the European Parliament calling for an investigation of Carlson and his crew, which may lead to sanctions and a travel ban in Europe. This is insanity. This is the level of clown world that we have descended to. Because a journalist dares to do his job, he must be crushed. They're labeling Carlson as a traitor, a shill for Russia, a mouthpiece for Putin. They haven't even seen the interview. Someone who's showing favor to Russian propaganda and giving aid and comfort to a terrorist, quote-unquote, terrorist nation. Now, I find this terribly ironic because we only have to look back into history to see some echoes involving reporters and Russia. Let's go back to, 1933, for example. One Walter Duranty. Now, who was he? Well, he was the New York Times bureau chief in Moscow. And this would be right during the height of the Stalin regime. Ironically, this also involves events happening in Ukraine, or, as Mr. Duranty would attest, events that were not happening in Ukraine. See, Mr. Duranty was assuring the world that the reports of starvation and famine that had been coming out of Ukraine were in fact lies, vicious propaganda that was spreading to discredit the wonders of Soviet communism. He wrote in one of his articles, quote, "Any report of a famine in Russia is today an exaggeration or malignant propaganda. The food shortage, however, which has affected the whole population in the last year, and particularly in the grain-producing provinces, the Ukraine, North Caucasus, and the Lower Volga, has, however, caused heavy loss of life." It's a very clinical assessment of an event that cost millions of people their lives. It was just natural events that led to some people dying. Some people did a thing. It wasn't a planned action from the glorious Stalin. No. Now, Duranty won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting in Moscow, all of which came to be proven false and propaganda in and of itself, because a vast famine was indeed taking place, and millions of Ukrainians and Russians died from forced starvation. This was Soviet central planning at work. This was what came to be known as the Holodomor. And when you give up control to a committee who are mad with power and zealous with devotion to failed ideology, you get death and disaster. And when your reporters and press are enamored with that same ideology, then it is not surprising that they will follow in the footsteps of Mr. Duranty and wash over the ills and evils of that ideology, because they believe in the ends, and they believe that the ends justify the means. Now, it took a reporter from a small Welsh newspaper traveling to Russia himself with hopes of interviewing Stalin to expose the truth of the matter. Gareth Jones reported about the famine and the deaths, and for that, he was banned from traveling back into the Soviet Union. How interesting. He was later kidnapped and murdered while reporting in Mongolia on something different. But there's evidence that this was done by the Soviet NKVD. And it took until very recently to finally see organized opposition and pushback to the way that Mr. Durante was portrayed in the West. There was a call in the early 2000s for the Pulitzer Committee to rescind the prize in his name. That, however, was not done, with the Pulitzer Committee saying that they could find no evidence that the reporting was intentionally misleading. Interesting. Very, very interesting. We look back on that history and we can easily, at least those of us on our side of the spectrum, can easily identify the injustice and the evil that was done in that entire story. Durante's fellow reporters back in the U.S., and even some in the UK, supported him. They defended him and lauded his work, not because they believed that he was accurate. It was because they believed he was justified. They wanted to see the Soviet Union succeed, and they didn't want to see any negative information about its evils and its failures. History has a way of rhyming. Today we have a reporter going to Russia to report the truth, and the Western press and Western governments want to suppress him because they want that truth hidden and distorted, not because they think he is incorrect. They know he's reporting the truth. They want it hidden because this time around they want Russia to fail. They want Russia to be seen in a negative light. They want any positive information prevented from reaching Western eyes. They know that when the majority of people see what is really going on in Ukraine, they will demand the regime put a stop to this. Because the Western support for the war in Ukraine is an unmitigated disaster. It has led to the death of tens of thousands of Ukrainians and the most wide-scale destruction in Europe since the Second World War. We have blood on our hands for this. And I say that because we have allowed this to happen. Our leaders have done this in our name, with our money, and our weapons. We are not innocent in this, as much as it pains me to say that. That's going into the deeper layers of this, because regardless of what those who are pulling the strings and controlling the narratives have to say, regardless of what they intend, what the agendas of all involved are, we're on the hook for this because we have allowed it to continue. And we throw our hands up and we pretend that we're powerless to stop it. I don't like that any more than you do, but I can't deny it. And this is how the Eastern world judges us. Saying that we are innocent and without responsibility because of these hidden hands or these hidden factions and the elite, it's not really good enough. Now, I love mysteries and conspiracies. I love trying to figure this all out. You know, who's who and what is really taking place in back rooms and dark places. Maybe one day we can figure all of that out, but I can assure you of one thing. We will never know the truth until we're at the top, until we're in control and tearing open the vaults, bringing out all the files and the reports and naming names, and yes, bringing those people to a final justice. That's not going to happen or even start happening in November, by the way. You need to divorce yourself from that notion. There is no voting our way out of this. We owe the world an explanation. We owe the world some humility and some truth. Now, Gareth Jones risked his life while he was in Russia. He broke away from his handlers to gather the information about what was taking place. He managed to arrange a trip to Kiev from Moscow by train. And before he got to his destination, he took a risk. He got off the train. Something like 40 miles from Kiev, he got off the train. He walked for miles and miles and documented the devastation that he saw. Without him taking this risk, the world may never have known about the mass starvation that killed millions of people. As I mentioned, he eventually paid with his life for this reporting. Now, we can't see into the future, of course, but I can't say with any level of surety that Tucker Carlson will not also pay for his reporting. And some will argue that he's controlled. He's controlled opposition. And that's possible. But it's also quite possible that he's maybe just on a different faction, a different team. And that faction wants the current plan being acted out to fail. That's enough to get him on the list. That's enough for him to be putting himself at risk for doing this. So I don't think that we can rule out that this trip was risky one bit. Perhaps it eventually ends up being on the same tier with the work of Gareth Jones, but it's too early to say. I do know that there are lessons here that we all need to be learning. Fortune favors the bold, and unless risk is taken, there can be no real reward. Now that's all I got time for today. Like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab and the Mothership, and I'll see you on the next episode.